How's it going, everybody? My name is Bo Lewis. I am a Spearhead Special Project Advisor.
And I'm Mike Champion, Director of Business Strategy at Spearhead.
So today we're going to discuss the CRSC process for Spearhead. I'm going to share my screen. Mike, let me know when you can see that.
I got it.
Outstanding. All right, so CRSC, this CRSC process we've created here is a step-by-step process to walk you through from gathering all your documents all the way to submission for your specific CRSC service branch. So CRSC specifically is only for retired service members or those who have been medically retired as well. You have to have combat-related VA ratings, and this process is you submitting to your service branch for them to acknowledge which of those ratings are combat related. It does work alongside the VA, but it is specific to your military branch. This uses the VA documents that you're rated for, but that's where the VA involvement ends. So phase one is what we're currently doing now. After this, you'll move into phase two, which is gathering documentation. Now, there's two parts to the gathering documentation. What Spearhead needs from you is, and we have a client drop off and pick up file system. Spearhead needs your VA decision letter and your applicable medical records. So if you've already gone through the Spearhead process, we will have the applicable medical records and your addendum that we created for you. If you haven't, we will need all those medical records to help build out your DD 2860. Separately from that, and you can start working on the gathered documentation now, you'll need additional documentation for your CRSC submission to your service branch. And I'll get into that in a later slide. So once you submit your VA decision letter and we have all the medical record or addendum documentation that we're looking for, we will then create your narrative, generate your narrative for you, and that's going to be detailed and specific to each individual ailment. Once we have that, we're going to send it back to you. You're going to review it, and then after that is the submission. Now, that's where you're going to need all the documentation that the CRSC board requires. You're going to email that to the specific service branch. If once you review everything, the 2860 that we provide for you, once you review that, if you're happy and comfortable with submitting it on your own, no issue there. If you would like a sanity check, we're happy to meet with you to give you one last look at the package prior to you hitting send to your service branch. After that, it's a waiting game. For the Navy Marines, it's up to 12 to 15 months. I think the Army is around 120 days, but you're just waiting for them to rate your package. And I'll talk about retroactive payment in a further slide. So what the CRSC boards are looking for and what Spearhead is going to generate for you is the explaining why your ailment is combat related. So to do that, you've got to meet one of four criteria: either armed conflict, hazardous duty, simulated war, or instrumentality of war. Armed conflict, self-explanatory, as is hazardous duty, just inherently dangerous tasks. Simulated war is if you get hurt training for a deployment, even if you don't end up doing that deployment, that qualifies as simulated war. And then instrumentality of war, weapons, vehicles, equipment of war. One example that they use is if you're deployed and you're playing ultimate frisbee and there's a Humvee on the field and somebody tosses the frisbee and you run into the Humvee, that does not count. However, if you're in the same scenario playing ultimate frisbee and somebody hops in the Humvee and then runs into you, that would count as instrumentality of war. Some examples that don't qualify: if you're injured, you get an injury, sustained while commuting on base, routine PT, not to be confused with simulated war, combat simulation, or other stress-related conditions that are unrelated to combat. So the bulk of this process is your 2860. When we give the 2860 back to you for your review, it's not going to have your personal information in there. You'll fill that out. This should be, the first three should be no, and then the last one should be yes for everybody. And then you'll fill out if you're, what branch, service branch you are, and what combat operations you served under. So section 4 is the meat and potatoes of the 2860. Now, it's important to note that this differs from the 2807. That goes in your medical record prior to you getting out. The 2860 is specific to a CRSC submission. So make sure you're not confusing the two. We're going to provide this to you, but there's only going to be one disability listed per section 4, and then we'll just replicate that for as many ratings as you have. So when you receive your 2860 from Spearhead, you're going to want to come down to your section 4s and review each one of these individually for accuracy. The way we'll have it listed is just like you see on the screen. It's going to have your title of disability up top, the body part affected, the rating that you received, where you received it. So we'll check if it's armed conflict, hazardous service, simulating war, instrumentality of war, unit assigned, location, and then J is where you really need, you'll check all that for accuracy, but J is where you really need to focus your attention. We're going to have your narrative in there. And again, it's going to be tailored from your medical records, from all the information you've given us, and from your VA rating. It'll be a tailored narrative there for each one of your ratings. So make sure you're checking that for accuracy. And again, you're reviewing this. If there's you find any mistakes, that's where you reach back out to Spearhead and we make any corrections necessary. We will indicate if you received a Purple Heart there, and then if there are any secondary disabilities, those will be listed under block M. In section 5, it just shows you a list of required documentation. So if you get to that point, forget what is actually required to be emailed to your service branch, the list is included in the 2860. And then section 6 is very important to ensure you sign. Now, I know with the Navy submission process, they've been having issues with digital signatures being stripped out. So you digitally sign it, you email it off, and then something happens, and they've had where the digital signature gets stripped out of the document when they receive it. That obviously causes problems on the processing end for the service branch. So their recommendation and our recommendation to you is that you just wet ink sign that and then scan it in. That way you won't end up with any issues there. All right, so again, this is your section 5 just spelled out with a little greater detail, all the required documentation. So you have to have your DD-214 member 4 copy. You're obviously going to have the 2860 submission that we just went over. You're also going to upload your entire VA rating decision. You're going to want to submit medical records that speak to the how of each individual rating. So you don't want to just upload your entire medical record. You want the parts that are specific to the ratings themselves. So if you have something, if you're rated for obstructive sleep apnea and you're trying to draw the connection to a combat relation there, then you would submit your sleep studies and anything in your medical record that spoke to obstructive sleep apnea. If you are a medical retiree, you'll not only submit your PEB findings, but you will also, it's recommended that you submit your PEB proceedings here in a later slide. Additional recommended documents, awards. If you are somebody who's done tons of combat time, you've got a lot of awards with valor that speak to combat. It's going to be up to you on how many of those you want to submit. I've not heard any specific number of awards that should be sent as supporting documentation. Again, it's recommended only. So I would say just make a judgment call on how many of those you want to submit. I personally, when I did mine, I just submitted my combat action ribbon citation, and that was adequate. any additional military treatment facility records that speak to the ratings themselves, you can send in. Your retirement military orders, and then again, if you were a medical retiree, the PEB proceedings. Once you have done all that, so now we're at the step where you've got your 2860, you reviewed it, you're happy, you've got all your supporting documentation, you're ready to submit everything. Again, Spearhead would be happy to sit down with you and go over everything to make sure you're happy prior to actually hitting send. But if you want to do it yourself, or if you want to sit down with us, process is the same. You're going to put it all in one email and you're going to fire it off to your service branch. Again, at that point, you should receive an acknowledgement email. Personally, I did not, and there was no issue. But if you didn't, I would recommend giving it a couple weeks and then reaching out to your service branch just to ensure that they did receive your package. There's also an option to mail a hard copy. Again, the what you see on screen is just an example of the Navy's process. They recommend you go through email and not send a hard copy. So if you want to pause and take a screenshot, these are the references for each individual CRSC process. You can also just Google Navy CRSC or Army CRSC, and you should be directed to that website as well. All right, moving on to Q&A and frequently asked questions that Spirit has received. So if you've been medically retired, the calculation's a little different than if you have retired normally. To calculate that CRSC payment, you're going to multiply your years of service times 2.5% times the high 3 of your base pay. If you've got more questions, you can Google, or if you look at the SecNav link that we've provided here to get a little more information on how to calculate a medical retirement CRSC payment. For everybody that retired normally, the math is a little different than the VA does their math. So you're going to take each rating individually and subtract that from 100%, and then multiply all that together and subtract that from 100%. So in this example, you've got 3 disability ratings of 40%. So this is what the VA rated you at: 40%, 30%, and 20%. Again, you're going to subtract each one of those individually. So 100 minus 40%, 60%, 100 minus 30, 70, and 100 minus 20 is 80. You're then going to multiply all those together, and you may have more than 3, but in this example, you'll multiply 60 times 70 times 80%, you'll get 34%, and then you subtract that from 100%, and you would end up with 66%. At that point, they do the rounding the same as the VA, so that would round up to 70% CRSC. Important to say there that if you, let's say you ended up with 100% VA disability, and for whatever reason you got 10% CRSC or 20% CRSC, but switching from CRDP would decrease your pay, they're not going to allow you to do that. You're going to keep whichever is the higher of the two. So this is really a no-lose situation. By submitting for CRSC, you either get higher and it moves to a tax-free bracket, or you don't and you don't lose anything. They're not going to switch you over to CRSC just because you applied for it. So on the tax and legal side, important to note that we're not giving tax advice or legal advice. However, if you are awarded CRSC, that does move you into a legally protected area. So it's tax-free, both state and federal. And then on the legal side, the only entities that can come after your CRSC are the government can garnish your wages if you owe the government money. And then child support and alimony can also affect your CRSC. Outside of that, things such as bankruptcy, other legal proceedings won't affect your CRSC at all. So tax implications, as I just said, CRSC is not taxed. However, when you're waiting on your CRSC rating, you will be paying taxes, assuming that you're having DFAS withhold your taxes. Now, that's another conversation. If you feel that you're a combat vet, you're 100% disabled, and you feel you've got a strong argument for 100% CRSC, that may be a personal decision for you to not have DFAS withhold your taxes, and you just pay out of pocket until you get your CRSC rating. But again, that's a decision for you to make. If you do end up paying taxes, unlike in the military, where if there's an overpayment, DFAS will refund you, you can't go through DFAS to get your refund. You have to amend your taxes. You'll have to amend your federal taxes. And if you're in a state that collects state tax, you would also have to amend your state taxes. DFAS will issue you a corrected 1099-R, and then that will go in with for the federal side, it would be a 1040-X. And then depending on what state you're in, you'd have to use their form to amend your state tax. CRSC and CRDP, as far as the checks you get right now, CRDP is automatic. If you've got your VA rating, let's just say you're 100% VA, and I'll say you're $4,300 a month, and you have your retirement. In your retirement, even though you don't really see it, is CRDP. That's what allows you to get your full retirement check. So right now you receive 2 checks. If you're, and in this example, I'll use $4,300 a month. Let's just say your retirement check right now is $5,300 a month, and your VA check is $4,300 a month. If you get 100% CRSC, $4,300 of that will move over into CRSC. So you will end up getting 3 checks: one VA for $4,300, one CRSC for $4,300, and then the remaining $1,000 will still be in your retirement. However, if you retired and your pay is less than that $4,300 a month, so let's say it's $3,500 a month, you'd receive only 2 checks. You'd receive your VA for $4,300, and then you would receive CRSC for $3,500, and you would no longer receive any retirement pay. In my first example, the $1,000 is the only thing you would still pay taxes on. And I believe that's it. Mike, anything to add before we sign off?
No, Bo, I think you covered it.
All right. Well, thank you to everybody for joining us, and we look forward to working with you.